Wrexham cost McElhenney and Reynolds $2.5 million. Like, that's nothing. Now, I mean, for them, it's nothing. For you and me, it's a lot.
It's everything.
Obviously, everything is predicated, though, on taking the $2.5 million investment and turning it into something much more valuable, right? And for Reynolds and McElhenney, the plan was create content around the team, invest in the team, climb the ladder, climb the pyramid in England, which they've done successfully to this point.
I would
right?
say their creative storytelling and their ability to get emotional buy-in from people across the planet is very much underrated. It's not just they put some money into a soccer team and now they're good, so people like them.
Right. So this is the problem I think that exists for anybody else who's trying to follow this example or follow in the footsteps of Reynolds and McElhenney or do it this way. This blueprint for them, I've always argued, is tied to their celebrity. If without their celebrity, does any of this work? But I still think that lots of people see this as a value proposition because it's a relatively small investment. Again, $2.5 million will get you a club in the National League, which is where Wrexham was when they bought them. And you have access to the top league in the world, right? Through the English pyramid, if you do everything perfectly, you can get to the Premier League. And even if you don't, you could presumably add value to your investment, right? But this is where it gets real sticky for us as fans. A couple of things. One of them is, do these people care about the game at all? Like, do they care about soccer at all? And even more than that, do they know anything about soccer? There is a note in Miguel Delaney's piece where he said a sporting director interviewed with a club bought by Americans. And that person went into an interview and came out like, I'm not even sure I was interviewed. Like, I don't know what that was. None of that made sense to me, meaning the person in charge of doing the interviewing clearly had no concept of the sport or the structures or the culture. And then there's this other thing, and this is maybe less of an issue for Americans who are on the other side of the world and can just watch. And, it's exactly what comes out of the Wrexham story, right? And Welcome to Wrexham itself as a show. The people in Wrexham might be fine with it because they're living it up as fans of a club that has now climbed multiple divisions under the ownership of Reynolds and McElhenney. But they're fetishizing blue-collar UK culture, right? They're taking the culture of lower division football and of a blue-collar place like Wrexham, and they're turning it into product. Mm-hmm. And is that something anybody should be comfortable with, but especially the people who come from these communities? Should they be comfortable with somebody coming in, some American, some Yank, some person from somewhere else who doesn't really have a connection to the community saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to lift you up. You're going to climb the pyramid with us in charge because we're going to invest in your club. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. But by the way, we're also going to milk the community for everything it's worth, potentially, if we're going to follow the Wrexham blueprint. Not everybody will do that, of course. But again, it's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of institutional knowledge. Delaney mentions that there's a plan. He's seen like a business plan from one of these investment groups. They bought a club and they have get promoted to the championship. And the revenues that would result are on the books as in the business plan. We're going to get this much more revenue from being a championship club. But it has nothing about how you are going to become a championship club. How are you going to get promoted to that level so that the club will have that revenue? Like, just a big gap. In fact, I think it was Charlie Bohm. I'll give him full credit because it's a great joke. If you know South Park, it's very funny. The underpants gnomes, right? Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. And it's like, wait, that question mark is a big thing in all of this. And for these investors, you got to wonder if they have a big question mark in the middle of buy the club and profit.
Yeah, and there has to be success, buy-in, and for a lot of these teams, they probably have, full, depending on which club it is, they probably have full stands already. And so there's a whole lot of layers that they have to be added. Like Wrexham, I mean, their club, their stadium was falling apart. Their attendance was down because they were in such a bleak position. They had been just scraping by. And I mean, outside of the 2.5 million, they for the club itself, they probably invested, hundreds of times that on all the upgrades and all the various perks and the things they've done to win that buyback in. So maybe that 2.5 is a little deceptive. And but there's a lot more like this, like you said, the celebrity and just the good nature and all that. And then going back to fetishizing or putting the blue collar English person in the limelight for the individuals that have benefited from that, they're probably fine.
Yeah.
So if someone tried to recreate that, so if you're in Birmingham and you want to create those stories, it would be a little bit dirty. Like, hey, let's find the guy that kind of like ruined his family life by being a hooligan on the
Sure.
terraces and
Maybe.
that sort of thing.
Maybe. Again, I think it's really tough as a fan of some of these clubs. And I when I was covering the Wrexham story in the beginning on my old radio show, I would occasionally hear from fans of other National League clubs when they are in that division. And those fans, and this gets mentioned in Miguel's piece as well, those fans would say they're skewing the market, right? They're basically doing a city, but in the National League. They're because they spend so much more than anybody else, even if it's not millions upon millions upon millions of pounds, right? It's just a matter of scale, right? When you're in the National League and you can pay a player 100,000 a year or whatever it is, that's massive, right? I don't know if that's accurate, but it's fairly significant when they can recruit the level that they did. And if you watch the first couple seasons of Welcome to Wrexham, you saw them do that. You saw them go out and bring in these players who were capable of playing in a division or two higher, and they paid them more to play in the National League so they could win promotion, right? So other fans of other clubs in the National League go, wait a second, that's not fair. We don't have that money to compete. That skews everything. But of course, if you were on the Wrexham side of it, you're like, this is bloody great. This is fantastic. And then if you're a fan of another club and you see that some American outfit is eyeing you up, you go, yes, please buy us. Right? I've talked about this a lot. Like, if you're going to level up, particularly in the Premier League, and become a potential contender to win titles, you have to be bought by a sovereign wealth fund or a petrostate. Like, this is just how it works now. You can't just kind of like when you're now Arsenal is still relatively traditional in its structures, so maybe they're the exception these days. But if you want to move into the upper echelon, having not already been there, and you could argue that from a revenue perspective, Arsenal's already in the upper echelon, Robert. Well, then
Definitely.
you needed the massive money, foreign money, to come in and buy you. City, it happened to City, it happened to Chelsea. Right? Those two teams leveled up into the level they're at because somebody with billions invested in them. And that's just the way it is. And it's not any less true in the lower divisions. Right? It's not any less true in the National League than it is in the Premier League. It's just a matter of scale. And so when these groups buy these clubs, if you're a fan of the club, do you care about their intentions? Do you care about their motivations? If their motivation is just to raise you up, squeeze the value out, and sell you again, is that a problem if you are on the ride that, say, Wrexham is on right now?
I think a lot of folks in the short term, if they're finding the success, I think in the short term they'll do it. Maybe they come out the other side in a couple of years and was like, hey, we really got used and abused and my pocketbook's empty. But at the same time, I think in the short term, if their day out, if their favorite day of the week is the day going down to the game and the game experience has improved since that buyout, then maybe short term, yes, it's worth it. But maybe big picture, it's eroded.
Right. So it comes back to this sort of existential question for us as soccer fans, right? And I didn't grow up in an English environment, so I don't have that deep-seated connection, but I appreciate it intellectually. And certainly it we have similar emotional bonds with our professional teams in America, even if they are all franchises and always were. It's this idea of, do you throw up your hands and say, well, this is just the way it works, and I would rather be on the winning side, meaning I would rather have the investment from somebody who doesn't have any connection to my community, who might be just milking our club for more money, and so we can have potential success because that's what I'm living for with my club? Or, do you say, this is terrible, I hate this system, I hate the way this works, and either opt out or push back against it? And I don't know if I mentioned, was it this show that I mentioned FC United of Manchester last week? Yeah. Mm-hmm. They opted out and went and did their own thing. Now, they'll never have the glory of a European night at Old Trafford because they chose not to do that. Or a European night with their club, FC United of Manchester, is not going to be a Champions League level club. They chose to watch and enjoy a different level of football because they don't want to be tied to the corporate interest, to the moneyed interest, to the investment, and that's what this is.
All right. So before we're done with this segment, let's put our investor hat on. Jason, do you have an American investor hat you can put on right now? Do you have something?
No, I don't. I don't have a hat with a big dollar sign. What do
All
they
right.
wear? Is it like the green visor thing, like the people in Vegas wear? Is that one?
Sure, sure. For our purposes, let's put on our green money visors. And you are a North American that in the investor class who wants to get involved in soccer. Let's examine what our options are to get involved in the game at a lower league level on the American side. So you'd kind of have to look at, what investment at the front of this would you need, and what kind of support or infrastructure is there for you to invest in, and where do you find that improved value? Because obviously, at the end of the day, buy low, sell high. Overseas, it's buy a team. The theory: buy low, buy a team in the doldrums, get promoted, underpants. There's your profit. On the
Yeah.
American side, where would you say is that buy-in value at the lower league level? Where were we talking for that?
So okay. So I mean, I don't know that we're pegging every club at $2.5 million, which is what Wrexham apparently cost
The
Reynolds and
average, I looked
McElhenney.
it up. The average championship side in England is around that 2.5 million mark.
The average championship side, you
Yeah.
buy a championship club for 2.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Or two and a
that
half
sounds
million pounds, so that's over $3 million.
no, that still seems very. The average championship side sounds very low for a second division team, but maybe that's the case.
Trust
Maybe that is the
transfer
case.
market.
Well, that's the value of their total roster in terms of transfer fees. I don't think that that's the value of the club itself as a business unit. But
it says
okay,
average market value of an English championship team is around 2.5 million pounds.
but okay, okay, that okay, that maybe. I'm still not sure about those numbers, but I will say this: if we're talking about that kind of investment, the USL, which is still expanding, I believe it is $20 million to get into the USL Championship as an expansion franchise, and something like $5 million to join League One. So you have, at least somewhat similar numbers at the League One level to what you might pay for an English club, something like that. Obviously, significantly higher for USL Championship. If the money, if just pure dollars is the issue, it's really hard to argue you're not getting a better value in England than you would here. But I think that you are doing different things. Like, I'm not sure these even comparable in that way in terms of as investment vehicles. Right here in the United States, you're playing a longer game, I think. You're obviously tied to the league's health in a very significant way. And the league is operating in a marketing capacity that, say, League One and the Championship are not. The Football League, yes, I guess, on a whole in England. But again, those clubs are so tied into the identity of their communities that it's a fundamentally different thing than starting a new team from scratch the way you would in the United States. And even if you were buying an existing team in the United States, nobody in the USL is older than a couple of decades. And those teams, I don't know. We're talking about Richmond Kickers. Most clubs are, what's the average age of a USL team? 5 years? 8 years? Something, maybe? And again, pulled higher by clubs like Richmond and Charleston. They're different. They're very different things. Obviously, there's no promotion or relegation here in
Yeah,
the United
that's the big
States.
one that's like kind of looming here.
You're not going to have a chance to move up the ladder, move up the pyramid. That, I think, for a lot of people who aren't actually in this investor class and just look at this from the outside and aren't participating, they're like, well, that's the deal breaker for me. If I can't go up to the top division, why on earth would I buy a lower division soccer club in America? But obviously, people do start and buy lower division soccer clubs in America, so somebody is seeing value there. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. Now, maybe they're stupid, and the people buying clubs in England are smart. I don't know if it's as simple as that. I think, though, that if you asked me where I would prefer to put my money, I mean, I'm an American, and I want to believe in the growth of soccer in America, but I'm also very aware of how difficult it is to gain traction in American soccer. Sort of like buying a minor league baseball team. Like, that there's a ceiling here, and your value is not it's not really your own. It's kind of tied to much bigger sort of issues of governance, issues of organization. That's not the case in League One or the National League. You know very clearly, I start here, I can go up. I think I'd buy a club in the National League, Rob. I think I'd buy a club in England and or Wales, I guess, whoever's available there now after Wrexham got scooped up, and try to make my way there. I mean, at least I would have the knowledge that if I do a little bit and have a little bit of success, I have a built-in fan base. Right? All I have to do is service that fan base